Hey everyone, this is Dr. Drizzle, and welcome to the National Parks Expedition Challenge. Today we are in Petroglyph National Monument in Albuquerque, New Mexico with Ranger David. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of background on this filming today. We are in COVID, so we're sort of staying our distance apart. Ranger David, thank you so much for having us here to your beautiful rock concert that we have around here.
That's right.
So,
well, thank you for coming.
yeah, so it is beautiful, and thanks for sort of pushing me to come further back in the canyon. So, David, how did you get to this particular park? Tell us your journey.
So I have had a career with the National Park Service for a little under 10 years now. It was sort of a second career. I was a kind of a traditional classroom teacher for a number of years, taught history, special ed, and always loved the parks, big promoter of the parks, visited lots of parks, and Park Service and visiting national park sites was kind of my, summer, something I did in the summer that I really enjoyed. And I was able to transition into an interpretive ranger, which is what I am. And I've worked at, this is my fourth national park site that I've worked at. And in all four of those sites, I've worked with the education division of those parks. And so developing curriculum based material for students and leading groups, and now we're doing a lot of virtual programming and also developing a program for the general public and doing ranger-led hikes and talks and that sort of thing. So in many ways I still consider myself an educator, and I really enjoy doing a lot of the site-based educational programs that we do. And now actually I have a greater appreciation for a lot of the virtual things that we're doing now that we were kind of forced to do, but I see a lot of the benefit in that as well.
Well, I love your journey here, and as you probably know, we're talking to hundreds of thousands of kids and teachers who are in the classroom and probably being a little envious of wanting to work in the national parks. So your journey is probably pretty exciting to them that you were in the classroom and now here. Teachers, I'm going to ask you though, don't leave the classroom to come do this. Go ahead and finish what you're doing in the classroom, get through that, and then come to the national parks after that, because we need you in the classrooms right now. So we are at the Petroglyph National Monument. Tell me about this place.
So Petroglyph National Monument is a very special place. We're located on the west side of Albuquerque, New Mexico, and we are what we call we talk a lot about the cultural landscape, as we call it, and it has to do with primarily the petroglyphs. It's worth mentioning that a lot of parks here in the Southwest have what are called petroglyphs. Petroglyph are rock carvings, and they're found throughout the Southwest. But we are the only park within the national park system that was set aside almost entirely for the preservation and protection of petroglyphs. And so we are known for our high concentration of petroglyphs. That's estimated at over 20,000 petroglyphs are found within the monument here. The monument's around 7,500 acres, which is about a mid-sized park. And all the petroglyphs, for the most part, are concentrated along this volcanic escarpment here. That is the backdrop here where we're filming. And this volcanic escarpment is 17 miles long, and it's basically the end of a volcanic flow. There was a series of flows, volcanic flows. We have fissure volcanoes on the western side of the park, but about 200,000 years ago, this area was very active. And again, there was a series of volcanic flows, and this is basically the end of a volcanic flow that over time got eroded, and then blocks, all these blocks that we see here of lava rock, they're called basalt, is the type of lava rock, was one time up top as part of the cap rock, but over time it got eroded and bits of that cap rock broke down, tumbled down, and actually kind of armored this very sensitive volcanic hillside. And of course, later, much later, the Ancestral Pueblo left petroglyphs here, and then actually after that, we have Spanish petroglyphs. The Spanish settled and were mostly sheep herders in this area. I should mention that most of our petroglyphs, again, were carved by the Ancestral Pueblo between around 1300 and around 1680. And then starting towards the end of the 1600s, we have the Spanish came in what is now the monument, and they were mostly sheep herders again, and they left their own petroglyphs. And they're also fascinating as well. So we talk mostly about, here at Petroglyph National Monument, we talk mostly about the cultural landscape, the human history, the human struggle really that took place here over a long period of time. But there's also, of course, a lot of geology, specifically the volcanology of the park is very important. And we have people that come, particularly on the west side of the park where the volcanoes are, that are really just interested in geology. And there's a lot of 200,000 years ago when these volcanoes were active. That seems like, that's an eternity in human lifespan, but actually in geologic terms is not that long. So there's a lot of very well preserved here in this high dry desert. There's a lot of geologic features that are well preserved. So that's also kind of an overlay of some of our interpretive themes talking about the volcanic landscape, which really set the stage for the human history, for the cultural landscape that took place here, as well as it informed the natural history. And there's a lot of interesting plants and animals that also inhabit the park here. So, but mostly we're telling the Ancestral Pueblo story and the Spanish story. And it's just, there's a lot here, and we're kind of treated as a little bit of a drive-by park. People are coming through, and sometimes people will come and visit, and they'll say, we just have about an hour, so what should we do? And we're happy they stopped, but there's a lot here, and there's kind of almost like an onion. You can pull back as I've spent time really exploring the park, researching the park. There's always something new and interesting to discover here.
So before we talk about the people, I want to go back to the volcanoes for just a moment. So when I read that these volcanoes are extinct, but also are we close to an active fault line?
So we have what are called fissure volcanoes. They're small volcanoes, and they're probably not the traditional volcanoes that people think about in their mind when they hear about volcanoes. Most people will think of, one large volcano mountain with a central vent that was violently exploding cinder and volcanic ash and the like. Fissure volcanoes are called monogenic volcanoes. They tend to be small, and they're really generally just cracks in the earth where magma under tremendous pressure came up, and then of course in the form of lava there would be a series of flows, and that was the case here. So fissure volcanoes are probably different than what most people think of. There's different types of volcanoes, and we had a series of volcanic flows, and it's all associated. Our fissure volcanoes here are associated with what's called the Rio Grande Rift, and a rift is a stretching of the surface of the earth. And that rift extends from southern Colorado down through New Mexico and out through like El Paso area out in Texas. So it's a big swath of stretching of that surface of the earth, and that just brings magma, which is normally much deeper in the earth. It brings that magma closer to the surface of the earth. So the susceptibility of that magma coming out in the form of these fissure volcanoes is increased. And so we do see New Mexico, a lot of people don't know this, there's a lot of different types of volcanoes here. Sometimes New Mexico is called the volcanic state, and for good reason. And this whole area, this Rio Grande Rift area, is associated with these fissure volcanoes. So the volcanic field and that Rio Grande Rift is still active. It's actually one of the few rift zones in the world that's still active. And so it's sort of, volcanologists will tell you it's not a question of when we might see a volcano in this area. It just, or not a question of if, but when. So these, again, our volcanoes, probably those vents are long since shut down, and we don't see those as activating again. But certainly the Rio Grande Rift that these volcanoes are part of is still very active.
So the story of the volcanoes and all of this beautiful lava rock then sort of leads into the people that inhabited here. So can you tell us a little bit about them?
And one of the things I like about this park is the integration between the geology or volcanology with the Ancestral Pueblo, as well as with the natural history of the park. It all seems to be very connected. So volcanoes was actually instrumental or very important to the belief system of the Ancestral Pueblo. So when they were carving most of the petroglyphs here, we believe they were living down by the Rio Grande River, a couple of miles from here. And they were living by the river for obvious reasons, the constant source of water there. They were living in pueblos, in many cases multi-story structures. And they were coming here for a number of reasons, but definitely the spiritual connection that they had to volcanoes was definitely part of why they were coming here and why they were leaving petroglyphs. And most of our petroglyphs are not a written language. A lot of people think maybe it's like, the hieroglyphics of the ancient Egyptians, which hieroglyphics were really a language. They had an alphabet. The Ancestral Pueblo researchers believe did not have a written language, and petroglyphs are not designed in that way, but they spoke to ideas and beliefs. And so you can gain some insight into the Ancestral Pueblo and their belief system through petroglyphs. We sometimes call it the beautiful mystery, because really in many cases we don't know for sure what they were trying to communicate. But again, a lot of the images, there's a lot of animal depictions of animals. And there's actually one back here behind you, which we believe might be of a mountain lion. There's a long tail there. And we do believe that in part they were coming here for hunting purposes, so that might make some sense that they were also depicting some hunting scenes as well as some animals that they were hunting. But again, a lot of the images are also spiritual in nature, and still have sacred meaning for contemporary Pueblo people. So it's worth mentioning that we refer to this large group of people as the Ancestral Pueblo, and if you go to other sites in this area, they are connected to those parks in many cases. But there are contemporary Pueblo people today that identify as a Pueblo people, and they look at these petroglyphs as really left by their ancestors, and they give a lot of respect and almost convey a certain a kind of a stake to the land, that their people were here for really time immemorial, long period of time before whites came and settled here. So very, very important to contemporary Pueblo people. But really, these images should be important to all of us, and they tell a certain American story now. And once petroglyphs are damaged or destroyed, there's really no way to bring them back.
Right.
And unfortunately, there has been a certain amount of abuse over the years of the petroglyphs, as well as the volcanoes. There was a lot of mining that took place for some 60 years in the Volcanoes area. They were mining the cinder and small lava rocks for railroad beds, and then later for roads. But the Ancestral Pueblo in particular is a culture we don't know that much about, and researchers have learned a lot through archaeological digs, but we don't have any first-person accounts, and it's a culture we would like to know more about. And so in a way, petroglyphs, although as I mentioned are not a language, they're almost the closest thing that we have to a first-person account by the Ancestral Pueblo themselves.
So I was reading an article the other day that was kind of neat, more of a story or a blog, but it said that petroglyphs could be like the Instagram of today's social media, where it's just a picture and a glimpse or an idea and not a long story. So we'll investigate that a little bit. But when was the last petroglyph created, as far as you know, that's not a graffiti piece?
Right. And it may be helpful to sort of talk a little bit about the distinction, because petro means rock and glyph means carving. So petroglyphs are really any rock carving. And unfortunately, we do have some graffiti and some even just recently where people decide to etch into the rock. The Ancestral Pueblo were using stone tools that they were developing and fashioning on their own, which is kind of a fascinating story in themselves. So to use stone tools to carve these images took a lot of skill and effort and energy to do that. But with a crowbar, or even just a key, a model, just a simple metal object now, you can very quickly scrape off what's called this desert varnish and get into the lighter color of the rock underneath, and that's what creates these images. And you can really mar these historic petroglyphs and detract from the significance of them and the visual impact that they can have. So when I think of graffiti, I think of something that's done in a slapdash kind of way, and unfortunately we do see some of that. So-and-so was here, someone just writing their name, and again, it's very different than the time and effort that was put into these images, both by the Ancestral Pueblo and then later by the Spanish. Probably some of our most recent historic petroglyphs, what we call historic petroglyphs, are those that were left by the Spanish.
Okay.
And they were settling in this area at the end of 1600. Probably most of what we call the Spanish petroglyphs, and just a little sidebar, they weren't born in Spain, but they were culturally Spanish, and they were probably petroglyphs into probably the 1850s or so. And a lot of the Spanish petroglyphs are also interesting. I'd mentioned that most of the Ancestral Pueblo petroglyphs were probably spiritual in nature, and the Spanish in many ways continued that tradition. And so there's a lot of Latin-style Christian cross images that the Spanish left, and sort of denoting the new religion of the day. I should mention that we don't see a lot of examples of Spanish petroglyphs on top of or desecrating Ancestral Pueblo petroglyphs. There almost seemed to be a kind of respect for the previous indigenous cultures here. So we see a lot of Spanish style, Latin style crosses that the Spanish left, as well as sheep brands. They were mostly sheep herders, so they had family brands that they were also carving on rocks, as well as images of sheep themselves. You might have seen one there and they're pretty easy to determine the sheep images, and there's a lot of them. And I could mention that, dating. You mentioned how old or how young some of these images are, and it's very difficult to date petroglyphs. There's no sort of counterpart to, say, carbon dating that we have with archaeological site. When there's organic matter, we're able to, pretty confidently date that. With petroglyphs, it's not quite the case, although sometimes we're able to link a design or something that we know we've dated through carbon dating, through archaeological sites, that we're able to link that same pattern or design as a petroglyph, and we're able to determine roughly maybe when that was. But a lot of times, if you see a sheep or a horse, a depiction of a sheep or a horse, which we have those, and you'll see those as petroglyphs throughout the Southwest. That's a domesticated animal that the Spanish brought. The first contact was the Coronado expedition in 1540. So we're going to know that it's going to be after that point. So you can, when you see things like domesticated animals as in the form of petroglyphs, we're able to kind of roughly date them.
Well, it's interesting, as I was walking up here, I would see things, and then I would think of what I thought they were.
Right.
And some of the things that I thought they were, they wouldn't have had here. So how do they sort of marry the idea of some of these things are so, like I thought we saw elephants or maybe a dinosaur, I don't know, but you would assume that what we see here is what they saw here, right?
Yeah. So, and you mentioned dinosaur. There are some images that kind of look like a kind of dinosaur lizard, like, and of course there's lizards today, and right here in the monument. But maybe there are. The thing is that some of the depictions, there are some very realistic animal depictions that are pretty clear. Like we passed that rattlesnake, and you can see the rattle. It's clear that that's a rattlesnake. And then other times, maybe the image looks, you're pretty confident it's probably a coyote. There's still lots of coyotes here today. And then other times, there's actually a lot of images that are kind of a combination. We might call it kind of a combination of a humanoid and animal figure. And we actually passed one early on the trail out here of a bird-like human figure, and those have real deep current spiritual significance to contemporary Pueblo people. And those were almost certainly part of their belief system and origin stories that they had. So a lot of times to us, there's a petroglyph at another site where a lot of people say, "Oh, so that's got to be new, right? Because it looks just like a music note. It does kind of look like a musical note, but that's really we're putting on what we see." And we're pretty confident that in that case, that petroglyph is historic. It's an Ancestral Pueblo petroglyph, and who knows exactly what the carver was trying to depict, but we have our own overlay that we're going to put on it. So try to keep an open mind, and again, it's sort of back to what we call the beautiful mystery. Sometimes we're just not sure really, and there's a lot of images in some cases that are just abstract designs that are really pretty to look at, but to us, it's really unclear on what it could be.
When we film at places like Carlsbad Caverns and Mammoth Cave underneath the ground, we're looking at places, and the staff that work there have actually given these places names. Do you do the same thing here? Do you have places where you call that the animal petroglyph section or the abstract or?
We have historic names. So for example, this site that we're in right now, we call Rinconada. Rinconada Canyon. And a rincon in Spanish is a corner. So as you know, we hiked in here. There's a lot of little nooks, little corners in here. The Rinconada of the Spanish of those that settled in southern Colorado and here in New Mexico, northern New Mexico. A rinconada also came to mean a dead end, and this is definitely a dead end here. We're at the end of this canyon. We call it a canyon. It's probably not a true canyon. But so we do use a lot of historic place names. A lot of those are linked to the Spanish, but we don't have specific names for different petroglyphs. There is a panel at another site of handprints. We do sometimes see handprints, and there's one, we call it a panel when there's multiple petroglyphs on one boulder, and there's one really interesting panel at another site with just multiple handprints. And that is one area that people will specifically ask about. Maybe they came here 20 years ago, maybe they came here before it was even a monument, but there's something about handprints in particular that seems very human that we could really connect with. And people, it tends to stand out for us, for people, and so people do ask us about that and want to see it, or they'll see a picture of it and they'll say, okay, tell me how to get there, you know.
Right. So there are some things that you can directly interpret, and that's the nature and animals here, right? So tell us a little bit about the infamous rattlesnakes. But I heard the name rattlesnakes and got a little nervous here. So relieve my fears and let's give them a better name than I have in my head.
Yes. So we do have rattlesnakes here. We have two types of rattlesnakes, the western diamondback as well as the prairie rattlesnake. And we also have different types of gopher snakes and other types of snakes that are non-venomous. So all snakes, including rattlesnakes, are really part of the natural environment here, and they're very important with being connected to the really to the ecosystem that we have here. We have two different types of rabbit, two different types of squirrels that are here, and they actually mostly live along this volcanic escarpment. So there's kind of a band along this 17-mile escarpment where there's a lot of prey, and then of course that tracks predators, rattlesnakes being a classic predator. So, but they keep that rodent population at a natural level, and they're very, very, very important. So it's worth mentioning that all snakes really are quite important. And when we come out here, we're in their environment. So we want to be respectful of them, because we're just visitors here, but they actually live here and depend on the environment here. Rattlesnakes, unfortunately, that rattle that they're known for can be very off-putting and scary, and a lot of people interpret that as actually aggressive behavior. But what the rattle is really telling you is, hey, I'm aware of you, I want you to be aware of me, and I would like you to give me some extra space. And if you look at, and you can go on YouTube and Google, rattlesnakes, and you can see a certain posture that they take where they're focused, like if you were close to a rattlesnake right now, it would be focused on you like a laser, and it would be coiled up, and then it would be rattling. And that is not aggressive behavior. It's just telling you, hey, back off, you're making me a little worried. And so when you see any snake in the environment, certainly rattlesnakes or any venomous snakes in particular, you want to back away. And what you'll find, if you back away, they'll usually stop rattling and they'll kind of move on their way. So yeah, you don't need to have an unnatural fear of rattlesnakes. And we do see that. A lot of people seem surprised that there's snakes out here. And this really, again, is their natural habitat. We also, on the other side of the spectrum, have people that come out here and they really want to see a rattlesnake, and they're disappointed that we didn't arrange that for them. But the chances of seeing a rattlesnake actually are kind of limited. They tend to come out in the mornings and in the evenings. Especially during the summer when it's warm out, they're going to be probably, like when we started this hike at 9:30, it was already pretty warm.
Right.
They're already underneath these rocks and escaping the heat and the sun. They can't really tolerate that much intense heat. They'll just go for cover. So the chances of seeing them during the day is pretty slim. And then during the winter months, when it gets cold, they basically hibernate and they go underneath, under these rocks, and they're there for most of the winter. They might come out in the early spring to just sun themselves and then go back under, kind of testing the weather and see if they're ready to come out. But one of the things that we have to remind people a lot of, and that's one of our challenges here, is trying to encourage people to stay on the trails. So there's lots of reasons to stay on the trails, but one in regards to rattlesnakes is if you are on the trail, you could see them basically. And if you see and they do, they will cross the trails from time to time, but they're en route. It's not really they're not just hanging out generally right on the trail. So they're already moving somewhere else, and you could see them, and then you just want to stop and back away and give them time to move on. When you go off trail, which in a sense, particularly this escarpment here is a very sensitive area. And unfortunately, we have lots of people that want to walk off trail, and they want to walk up to either get a good view or look at some of the petroglyphs, get that perfect photo. And when you do that, you'll stomp on these plants, and it causes erosion problem. But also, that's where snakes are they're gonna be maybe under a crack in a rock or wrapped around some of this brush here, and you're not going to see them. So you don't want an unexpected encounter with a snake, and that's where you can really be frightened and caught off guard. And there are very rare cases where someone might step on a snake and they might bite them, but it's very, very rare. In fact, there's more probability of dying from a bee bite or even struck by lightning than being bitten by a snake. So really the caution is just be aware of your surroundings, and that really applies more generally in the Southwest. We have a lot of the natural plants here have thorns, so you want to not be wearing flip-flops and try to protect. And long pants are really recommended, and just watch where you're putting your feet at all times, and staying on trails as a general rule. And there's lots of reasons to stay on trail, but that's definitely one.
Well, let's talk about that for a moment. So that the Expeditions Challenge encourages kids to solve a challenge that a national park may have. And staying on these trails for safety is a great thing, but also we have issues with erosion here. I noticed as we were walking on the trail, I was stepping on something I just called logs, but you called it a ladder.
That's right, a sand ladder.
A sand ladder. So that's something that you guys have put in place here to sort of stop the erosion. When is the worst time of year, if there is one, for erosion here in the park?
I'm not sure that there's a particular time of year. These plants, these desert plants, which are very, very important to the natural environment here, and incidentally, they're linked to the Ancestral Pueblo. All of these native plants here had medicinal purposes that the native people were using and preparing. They didn't just go into a pharmacy to get a cough, medicine, or to help with bleeding or something. They were really well trained and had a lot of knowledge in how to utilize these plants for medicinal plant purposes. Incidentally, a lot of the medication that we use today is plant-based, so it's not surprising that the Ancestral Pueblo were using plants in that way as well. But these plants, this is a fairly harsh desert environment, and we do go for periods without very much rain. And so it doesn't take a lot of trampling. Just stepping on these plants a few times will kill them. And then all of this, we call it alluvial soil. So aside from these blocks of basalt, this lava rock, it's really sandy, rocky soil that's very prone to erosion. So if these plants are out of the picture, the roots of these plants are really key in keeping that sandy, rocky soil in place. And so if they die, then we get these torrential downpours, these monsoon rains. It's just going to wash all this sandy soil away. And then it will eventually cause trenching and these kind of canals that will form. And that's what the sand ladder is trying to prevent. When there's some grade there, it just allows for you to step, and it's just less susceptible to just water when we get these big downpours carving in and carving a big sort of canyon. What will happen over time if people continue to go off trail? They'll trample the plants. It becomes very erosion starts to happen, and then it could actually these boulders, these basalt stones, which are really anchored in place and have been here for a long time, can become unstable, and they can actually fall or slip or slide. And that's, in addition to that being a safety concern, it's disrupting the natural or the historic place that this boulder, the position that it was in, and our ability to see the petroglyph. And so we really want to keep all these boulders in place where they are now. And this is a really stabilized, hillside here, as long as we don't go off trail and cause erosion problems.
Okay. Well, I think that segues into our challenge. So students, what I want you to do is I want you to do some research here on the Petroglyph National Monument. You see their website running across the bottom of the screen, and come up with some ideas for Ranger David and the other people that work here that would help them deter erosion by maybe keeping people on the trails and not off the trails. As you see in this video, the ladder that they have created here, what other engineering type pieces could you create that would help people stay on the trail or stop the erosion or the eroding of the actual trail that we're walking on? Or what social media campaign could you create for the petroglyphs that would help them encourage people that come here to visit to stay on the trail for safety reasons, to stay away from those rattlesnakes like I'm trying to do, but also just to protect this very beautifully sacred monument so that people from years on can enjoy it. We know that the goal of the national park is to preserve and protect, so we need your help to decide how you're going to do that and help these guys. I mean, they're smart. We know that they're smart, but they're also very busy, so that they would encourage your help. This has been really great. And snakes aside, I'm so glad we walked out this far, because you're right, this is a beautiful background, and we do need to have a healthy respect for all animals because we are in their territory, and all plants. And just the idea of this place being such a connection to so many years ago, the people that lived here. David, there's a lot of kids watching this that are in their class right now and they're thinking, I just need to get through school because I want to be a park ranger. Is there any advice you could give them as they're sitting in that classroom of things they can start doing or preparing for now? If you can just talk right to the camera and tell them.
Sure. Well, I'm a big proponent of what's called the Junior Ranger program. It's one of the most popular programs within national parks for young people, and really just about, there's over 400 national park sites throughout. Every state has at least one national park, and every territory has at least one national park site. So try to find your park and check out the Junior Ranger program. I think it's a great way to promote what we call stewardship values, a connection to a place, and that place can have historical significance like here. It could be more of a naturalist kind of park. It can also be more of a geologic park. So there's lots of different types of park, and maybe just try to see what area you're most interested in. One of the things that I find fascinating about a lot of parks, and that's definitely demonstrated here at Petroglyph, is there's the combination of those different areas that really keep it fascinating. But yeah, the Junior Ranger program is really, I'd recommend that. If you're looking for a career in the Park Service, there's definitely lots of volunteer opportunities, as well as a lot of parks hire what are called seasonal park rangers, and that's going to be for at maximum only about a half of the year. But that's a great way to get experience and to learn about a park and just learn about the process and develop experience. I'd also just say, if you're interested in becoming a park ranger, look into, there's state parks, there could be county parks, there's other opportunities, not just the National Park Service. So yeah, definitely keep an open mind about that.
Thank you. And as always, kids, we invite you to read as much as you can, volunteer, talk to people, find out what they're all about, share what you know, and you too could one day be a national park ranger, because David's not going to do this until he's 80, right? Maybe you might do it. Thanks so much for having us here today. It is a beautiful place, and there's a different feeling here than at some of the different parks. There is a sort of a connection here, and I can't wait to go around more and read more and learn more about this place.
Wonderful.
So thank you. So kids, thanks for joining us today. This is number 64 of our national parks that we have filmed today. So we're in September of 2021 and hoping to add 64 more in the next couple years. Thanks so much for joining us here at the Petroglyph National Monument on the western side of Albuquerque, New Mexico. And just a shout out to my friend Susan, who lives in New Mexico and is actually helping film this today. So thanks so much for joining us. This is Dr. Drizzle, out.